Hello again. It's time to talk about need and its relationship to justice. Let me start you off with a question. What do human beings need? What makes something necessary rather than a mere want? This question isn't an idle question. I think a lot of people have conflicted answers about it, or very sharply disagreeing answers about this. The way I see it, there's two categories of answers. There's a very physicalist answer, which says that what truly counts as a need rather than a want is something without which you cannot survive. There are things that you can want badly, but that doesn't make it a need. Needs are things without which human beings can't survive, so we're talking about air, water, food, shelter, clothing, things like that. And then there's a moralized answer. The moralized answer says that needs are things without which one cannot live with dignity, so one cannot live a properly human life without such things. And you might add things like status, self-respect, some form of psychological health. Those are things without which people can, in some sense, survive, but not live what Aristotle might call a fully human life. So two categories of answers. I'm not telling you that one is more right than the other, but simply to note that a lot of what we're going to say in this lecture depends on whether you have a physicalist or a moralized answer to that question. So how is need related to the idea of justice? At first glance, the question might seem a little bit curious. I mean, after all, it's not clear, for instance, that you have some basic right to having your needs met. I mean, you might have a legal right in some sense, but is there a natural right for other people to help you? You might say, well, at least that itself is a sharply contested sort of question. And yet there are good reasons to think that there might be some relationship. There could be a direct relationship. There might be cases where it is in fact unjust to ignore needs. If your children are in need, for instance, it might be quite unjust for you to ignore that need. So at least with respect to some people, it might be wrong to ignore needs. I like to use the example of someone driving by the scene of an accident that just happened, and that person driving by has a choice about whether to stop and help or to go about their daily life as if nothing had happened. And I think it's at least plausible to think that there might be a right and a wrong choice in that situation. Not because the person in an accident has a right to be rescued, but relative to the person who is driving by, they might think themselves that they have a duty to help, regardless of whether the other person has a right to be helped. There's also an indirect way in which need might be related to justice, and that's as a way of assessing rival theories of justice. That is to say, those theories that seem more likely to promote the fulfillment of needs are superior to those theories that don't. Now, in this sense, need is not acting as a direct principle of distribution of your time or money, but need is acting as a principle by which we evaluate societies. Societies where needs are met are societies that are better places to live, and so the theories of justice that regulate such societies might have something more to be said for them because they meet needs. So why might one be tempted to say that we have a duty to meet needs? Right? I said that in the case of the person being rescued by the side of the road, that there might be a duty to meet that person's need, even if that person perhaps does not have a right to have their needs met. And I think there's a number of different ways you can look at it, but given that all of these different moral theories have room for the idea of need, I think it would be wrong to ignore it. Those who have an interest theory of rights, that is to say that our rights have something to do with our central interests. Obviously, needs are a central interest that people have. Having their needs met is something that is central to their personal interests, and so if your theory of rights is simply that your rights are your most important interests that you have, then having your needs met is going to be right at the center of any theory of rights. Utilitarians tend to see that needs are essential to welfare claims, and needing is tantamount to extreme not tantamount of, tantamount to extreme disutility. So people who are in need are extremely miserable, and so the reason why we might meet needs as part of a theory of justice is simply because needing is bad. A third way that we can think about needs is that we can't really respect persons and ignore claims of need. Recognizing human dignity means assenting to, at least in part, make sure that people's needs are met. And so it's not possible for two people to get together and one person to be in deep need and for the other person to simply stand by and still claim to respect that person as a human being. Finally, to ignore neediness, you might say, is to demonstrate vicious character, and here you can see virtue ethics in action. Right? What kind of vicious character? Well, callousness, indifference to suffering. These are certain kinds of vices that people should not display. And on this view, though you might not have immediately a duty to meet all people's all needs, you do have a duty to be virtuous, and so you do have a duty to cultivate the attitudes and dispositions that make you a virtuous person. And not meeting needs, or at least some kinds of needs, might, at the end of the day, demonstrate a kind of vicious character. So, this is a class on political theory. After all, what is the role of government in meeting needs? How should the government respond to claims of need on the part of its citizens? Well, it's worth pointing out that to say that I should get what I need doesn't yet point to any person or entity who should fulfill this need. Children should get what they need, for sure, but probably mostly from their parents. Workers should get part of what they need from their employers, for instance in the form of wages. Spouses and families should probably work to satisfy each other's emotional needs. So there's going to be at least two ways to conceive of the government's role with respect to meeting needs. Governments could make sure that we get what we need, either by giving it to us, on the one hand, or making sure that these areas of life, like markets, families, and security, work reasonably well. That is to say that the government could have a very direct role in distributing the means to meet needs, or it could have a more indirect role in maintaining the social structures that enable us to get what we need on our own, so to speak. Now, it's worth also noting that meeting needs is not just about giving, or it's very distinct from the idea of giving. One might be committed to people receiving what they need for free as some sort of last resort, but still acknowledge that people should often have to work for what they need, or participate in cooperative endeavors in order to get what they need. Cooperative endeavors such as families, friendships, communities, and so on and so forth. That is to say, being committed to meeting needs is not the same thing as being committed to people receiving what they need for free. And again, there's going to be a distinction there. So people need to get what they need, but not necessarily for free. A need-based commitment to justice, therefore, is not automatically a commitment to kindness or charity. Indeed, it's quite distinct from a commitment to kindness or charity. Charity is something that would be good to do, but you don't have to do. That's the definition of the word supererogatory, right? It's supererogatory because it's something that you don't have to do, but it would be good if you did. Justice, on the other hand, is not supererogatory. Justice is something that you must do. It is an appeal to your conscience quite directly, and is binding on your conscience. And so, if, as is plausible, need plays some role in theories of justice, then it's not about kindness. It's about doing what you are obligated to do. Schmitz mentions a really interesting feature of the way need interacts with our theories of justice. Many theories of justice posit some role for distributing goods, time, services, and opportunities according to need. But if we care about need, and if we really care, then we want social structures to allow and encourage people to do what works as far as meeting needs is concerned. So societies that effectively meet needs, historically speaking, have always been those that empower and reward exercises of the productive capacities that people have, the productive capacities by virtue of which people meet needs. Even if meeting needs were all that mattered, we would still not want to detach the awarding of paychecks, for example, from what actually meets needs. That is to say, productive work. Remember, this is an important sentence. Even if meeting needs were all that mattered, that is to say, the only thing that we cared about distributing was according to need. And we can think of many cases that we don't want to distribute according to need. So if I were to grade papers according to how much my students needed a good grade, I wouldn't be doing my job, and I think most people would find that an unjust way of grading. But let's say that the distributing according to need was all that mattered. We still wouldn't want to detach the awarding of paychecks from what actually meets needs, namely productive work. We want, in other words, to encourage people to work hard and be productive. Why? Because when they're productive and there's more stuff in the world, more needs are going to get met, because there's more stuff to pass around, so to speak. So if you think about it this way, distributing according to need creates what you might call a moral hazard. That is to say, if you want to elicit something like speed, then you reward, if you want to elicit speed in a sprint, then you reward speed. But when we reward need, unfortunately, we tend to also reward the production of neediness, or at least the appearance of neediness. After all, if you say that we will give you stuff when you don't have any, then your incentive to have stuff might be somewhat blunted. And so distributing according to need may not always result in people getting what they need. And so Schmidt says that distribution according to need needs to pass the test of self-inspection precisely for that reason. That is to say, if distributing according to needs actually meets more needs than some other distributive criteria or sets of distributive criteria, then we should distribute according to need. But note there might be cases where distributing according to need is not what we should be doing, in part because you should be rewarding other things that contribute to meeting needs, in particular, Schmidt thinks, production. All right, that's all I have for you on need. If you have any questions, you know where to reach me.